Okay. And want it like that. Oh, really? All right, it's a little bit after 4, so I think we should go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our panel this evening. You are truly the the people who can't let go of the public forum and don't want it to end if you're here at 4 p.m. on Friday for a discussion. So we really appreciate your interest in our group. Public forum is one of my favorite times of the year to be in Geneva. It is always a great week, and it's really like a homecoming to see colleagues, former colleagues, and new friends here in Geneva. And so we've always been happy to be here. I'm Tiffany Smith. I'm with the National Foreign Trade Council. I lead our global trade policy work. And the theme of the forum this year on action for sustainability and how we can use the WTO and trade to take action on climate is one that is critically important to our member companies. We're a broad-based, multi-sectoral U.S. business group, and we have existed for for over 100 years for the sole mission of advocating for the rules-based, globally integrated economic system. So the work of the WTO is incredibly important to our members, and we're always happy to be here. I think we've made a lot of progress on confronting sustainability issues here at the WTO. 2 decades ago, there were trade talks and there were environment talks. And then we got to a point where we had trade and environment talks. But now we're really, I think, at a place where we're talking about sustainable trade and sustainable products. And so we've seen kind of a real merging of these two issues. And I think that's the right way to address it, because the challenges around sustainability, especially adopting new products, converting older technologies to cleaner technologies, are all issues that will depend on and are affected by the trade climate. So having the WTO taking this leadership role on sustainability and putting it at the forefront of this public forum has, I think, been a really great and energizing week here. So our panel today is focused on circular trade and building a circular economy to drive the green transition. And we came up with this subject because when we talk to our members about trade and environment and sustainability issues, it was striking to us that across the breadth of our membership, circular economy was an issue that was relevant and important, and something that almost all of our member companies were working on, whether they make technologies or products that are involved in the circular economy, whether they want to purchase more sustainable products that have been processed through the circular economy, or whether they're developing the technology or services itself that create the ecosystem for circular economy. This was an issue that all of our members really spoke about. So we have a really great panel today that I'm excited about. We have some people. So we have the Jeet Kar from the World Economic Forum. The WEF has been talking about circular economy for a really long time, and has been a leader in really framing that issue and educating people on the concept. And then we have Ambassador Sofia Boza from Permanent Representative of Chile. And Chile has been leading in the WTO on driving some of the circular economy discussions. And then we have 2 of our member companies who are going to share at a really practical level the experience that they have and the approaches that their companies are taking in circular economy. Becky Taylor from Caterpillar will speak to Caterpillar's work in the area of remanufacturing, and Amelie Coulet from IBM will talk about the consumer electronics space and how her company is addressing these issues and trying to advance the circular economy work. So as a sort of we're framing this from the business perspective, from the fact that initially companies may have been engaged on circular economy in a lot of cases because it was the right thing to do. But we're really coming to a point where companies are looking to circular economy out of a business imperative. And so that is really, as we look for, cleaner, more sustainable products, they can only really be cleaner and more sustainable products if they're manufactured in a cleaner and sustainable way. And in many cases, that means you can't really go back to the ground or back to raw resources for every single product that's going to get manufactured. So the circular economy provides opportunity to, at both the front end, to rely on materials that aren't virgin sourced, and then on the back end to take end of life equipment out of waste streams and give it new life or give it new use. So I think as we wrap up the week here in Geneva at the public forum, we're excited. We want this to be an engaging conversation. We don't want to talk at you, so we will leave time for questions, and I encourage panelists to engage with one another and ask each other questions and respond to some of the issues that come up. So with that introduction, I think we should get started with the discussion. And so I would ask, Jeet, could you give us, start with a bit of a overview from WEF's perspective about some of the concepts of circular economy and get us start us off with that overview.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany and the NFTC for inviting us to this wonderful panel. Truly honored and humbled to be here in between these experts. And thanks to all of you also for braving the Friday afternoon syndrome. I lead sustainable trade initiatives at the World Economic Forum, strategically sitting between our centers for environment and trade. And to your point, Tiffany, as you pointed out, together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and a few others, I think we were indeed one of the first movers in the multi-stakeholder circularity space, where we were able to bring down the idea into very practical currency. And being a public-private platform, from the outset, we have really stressed on the idea of partnerships for circularity. And it's really gratifying to see a lot of those ideas come into fruition. One of the early products of that effort was, of course, the platform for accelerating the circular economy, or PACE. And on trade and circular economy, our work started more firmly in 2019 with the electronics value chain, and then slowly moved into the plastics space. Why these two material streams? Because at least at a public level, both plastics and electronics have had the most apparent effect on the psyche, on what circularity means and what concrete solutions could deliver. But over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years, this trend has been spreading, and we are speaking more of circularity in all other sectors as well, which is, to us at least, a very welcome trend. And in terms of I think, Tiffany, what you mentioned around this trend of circularity evolving over the last few years, I find that quite interesting, because as a short answer, I would really agree with that. The evolution has been quite engaging, and that is due thanks to a lot of the people in this room who have driven stellar work on the ground. But it is also important to qualify this engagement. Not only has the quantity of engagement on circular economy across sectors enlarged, but its quality has also enriched. What I mean by this is, from being just an end goal for a lot of businesses, everyone recognizes, or many people recognize, circularity now as a means to achieve higher goals of societal and environmental outcomes. And regulation undoubtedly has played its key role in this. We have seen the Global Plastic Treaty as a key example. And a lot of the discussions on circular economy that go on in this institution have also acted as that much needed anchor towards which a lot of global initiatives can now look towards. At the World Economic Forum, we have two key communities of purpose that work on circular economy. One is our circular transformation of industries. That's mostly a business-led initiative. And it's at its heart, a public-private exchange of learnings from the circular economy, but also looking to inform policy and unlock financing towards scaling technologies that are absolutely key towards circularity. And the second one, the second community of purpose that we have, which I think is more of relevance to this room, is on circular trade. Here we have sought to bring together the trade, development, and environmental communities to bridge some of the gaps in policymaking and ensure a more coherent messaging and look at over the span of next 2 years, look at very incremental solutions that we can drive forward as pilot projects in regulatory sandboxes that can then give credency to a lot of larger scale solutions that we would like to propose. I will finish by observing that one key trend that we have also observed in the circular economy space has been the enmeshing of circularity topics with climate change, with biodiversity loss, and with job creation. And I think this admixture is very important towards ensuring that interministerial coordination, which renders circularity policy more effective. Thanks.
Both domestically and at the WTO, Chile implementing its own circular economy roadmap and then leading here at the WTO. Can you discuss what led to Chile's vision on circularity and how, give us an overview of some of the issues that the WTO working group is tackling in its discussions and how you see policy changes that may be needed to fully achieve the commercial and sustainability promise of circular trade?
Thank you very much, Tiffany. And let me begin by thanking the NFTC for organizing this panel and for inviting me to be part of it. Chile, as you know, has been working for a number of years now to advance towards a circular economy. Tiffany has already mentioned. We have legislation that addresses issues such as waste management, extended producer responsibility, and the promotion of recycling. And in 2021, we adopted a roadmap for a circular Chile by 2040. Our Ministry of Environment works to reduce the environmental impact related to waste generated and to promote a circular economy model that proposes a change in the linear ways of production, business models, and consumption, incorporating eco-design, reutilization, recycling, and valorization of materials. Their work focuses on the implementation of the legislation, which is ongoing as a number of regulations that are still being developed, as well as in strengthening innovation, the regulatory framework, and other instruments to advance the circular economy model. This work has been done in a participatory way with a number of different national stakeholders from the public and private sector. Academia and civil society was also very actively involved. This work also has a sectoral focus, which includes organic residues, plastics, construction, industry, food waste, to name some. And there is currently ongoing consultations regarding the textiles sector. The vision that led to this work, for example, in developing the roadmap for a circular Chile, was the understanding that the challenge of transitioning to a circular economy requires a long-term vision and concerted whole of society efforts to go beyond recycling to change the current linear model of production and consumption. That is why the process to put together this roadmap was participatory, in order to connect key actors, imagine what a circular economy model would look like in Chile, come to agreements on the changes that are required, design concrete actions that will kick off this transition, and give visibility to circular economy in the country. As for the discussions here at the WTO in the context of the Trade and Environment Sustainable Structure discussions, TESI, during the last year and a half, there has been exchanges of initiatives and domestic experiences aimed at advancing the circular economy, and many elements were expressed, explained, and shared. I think what we have seen so far reflects the complexity and broadness of circular economy, as well as the diverse links it has with international trade from different perspectives and in different stages. For example, there are a number of goods and services that can contribute to the transition to circular economy that are traded, such as more efficient technologies that can help reduce the use of materials in the production stages. Parts and accessories to reuse, repair, and or refurbish goods are also traded. And when we talk about recycling, we also see trade there because there are opportunities to give value to the waste, reducing pollution and reinserting materials in the economy, reducing also the pressure on natural resources. Circular economy and trade intersect in a number of other perspectives as well, such as how do we develop measures to support our national transitions to circular economy in ways that avoid unnecessary barriers to trade, in particular for developing countries and micro and small enterprises when standards and certifications are involved? Or how can we facilitate trade flows of second-hand goods or materials relevant to enable circular economy at regional or global levels in ways that consider capacities so they in fact are used for circular economy and are not or become waste that has to be dealt with in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's focus a little bit now on remanufacturing, and Becky, could you talk a little bit about what remanufacturing is? And Ambassador Boza introduced several concepts like reduce, reuse, recycle. Can you talk about how remanufacturing is actually different from some of these other concepts, and how Caterpillar is incorporating remanufacturing into its business model to benefit both consumers and lead the circular economy?
Well, first off, like Ambassador Boza and Jeet, I'd like to thank Tiffany and the NFTC for inviting me today to be part of this great panel. I'd also like to thank you all for attending this session so late on a Friday. But first, I guess where I'd like to start is what remanufacturing is and what it is not. So at Caterpillar, for us, remanufacturing is not refurbishing, reconditioning. It's not recycling, overhauling, or even downcycling. So if we want to take a look at various different avenues of what those differences are. So if we look at first refurbishing and reconditioning. So if you take a look at that process, it's taking a physical external inspection of that product. It's also doing an internal visual inspection. And then it's going through a cleaning process and doing some basic testing then before it goes back out to that customer. From a rebuild standpoint, they are disassembling that product. They are inspecting it, cleaning it, and then they're replacing that worn or broken parts. So when that product comes back together, you have parts in there that are new, and then you have parts that have already had some life into them. So it's really a mixed bag there for that end product. Now, from a Caterpillar remanufacturing standpoint, we are completely disassembling that product down to its individual piece parts. And at that point in time, that product actually loses its identity. Then it goes through a cleaning process. We go and take it through an inspection process. And then it's going through state-of-the-art salvage techniques in the manufacturing type process, where we're using techniques like laser cladding, metal depositioning. And then we bring that product back up to a like new condition, where it has same as new warranty at a much less cost, because we're starting with that used product to begin with. So how this process really works for us, we have customers globally around the world, and we want to make this as easy as possible for them. So we know that if it's a complicated process to bring back, they're not going to be bringing that back. So we want to ensure we're making that easy, so those customers end up bringing that product back to their Caterpillar designated dealership. At that point in time, those Caterpillar dealers are inspecting that used product, or what we like to call core, before they send it back to our Caterpillar processing center. At that time, our Caterpillar processing center is doing another inspection process in that region, and then they're sending it to our CAT remanufacturing factories. Now, with that, because we're starting with that core product, we're able to provide then benefits to the customer from a total cost of ownership for that product, where They're getting it anywhere from 45 to 85% less cost than new. They're also able to see some sustainability benefits to that as well. So anywhere from a raw material standpoint, they have around 80 to 90% less raw materials used in that remanufactured product because we're not starting from that initial raw materials coming out of the ground. We also have between 65 to 87% less greenhouse gas emissions compared to new, as well as 65 to 87% less energy usage as well compared to new. So it is providing that sustainability piece where those customers can help out their economies as well as improving in the cost aspect too. Now, I'd say with this product, we've been doing this for 50 years now. This year is actually our 50th anniversary in remanufacturing at Caterpillar. So we have had quite a bit of time to be able to build some of these processes. So, when we first started, we started with a couple engine models, and now we've expanded to greater than 8,000 parts or product. And many people have the misconception that we only remanufacture engines, but in fact, we're remanufacturing engine components, hydraulics, drivetrain, electronics, and more. So we've really been able to expand that market by really working with our new side and helping design for remanufacturing. Thank you, Tiffany.
And Amelie, tech companies in general have been associated in the past with concepts like planned obsolescence and e-waste, but that's really changing. And how has IBM implemented circularity into its own product designs and operations and asset recovery? And what challenges have you faced in working to address those issues?
I'm not going to be very original, and also thank Tiffany and the NFTC for inviting IBM to speak on this panel, particularly to discuss a topic which really has been an essential component of IBM's environmental policy, but also our product design for many decades. So first, just to give you a bit of context to our approach to circular economy, I'll just give you just briefly mention our history with environmental programs. As well, being quite an early adopter. Our first corporate policies in this area date back from the 70s. We've been implementing a global environmental program system, notably in the area of product and waste management since the early 90s. And we've been publishing an annual environmental report as well to track progress and performance for more than 30 years now. And every year. And these are not just sustainability pledges, those are actually transparent and measurable commitments in energy efficiency, resource conservation, and waste management, and how we embed all of those across our operations. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because we've been implementing effective solutions to tackle those issues for quite some time. And so you mentioned the tech sector and the association with e-waste and planned obsolescence. For us, has been a very different reality. And one of the main reasons is also because IBM is actually an enterprise company, not a consumer. So our hardware products or mainframe systems, such as servers, storage units, etc. And those are used by large customers, such as governments, banks, energy companies, airlines, etc. And they're part of complex system, which needs to be kept for quite a long time, usually. So our products are really designed and produced in a way that enable us to upgrade, refurbish, remanufacture, reuse them so that we can extend their life, but also so that we can dismantle, recycle, and dispose of them safely. So that's how we've been able to keep the technology as new and fresh as possible while minimizing the amount of waste. And we do have compelling data to demonstrate this. So in 2021, we set up 21 environmental goals. You can actually find them in those in this annual report that I mentioned earlier. One of them is to ensure that we send no more than 3% by weight of end-of-life product waste to landfill or to incineration. and that we recycle or reuse at least 97% of those. And so last year in 2022, we achieved this. Actually, we achieved 97.3% of reuse and recycled, and only 2.4% were sent to waste to energy for final disposition, and less than 0.4% were sent to landfills. I'll also add that we actually do not ship any e-waste across border. We always manage this with local suppliers, which are carefully vetted. So the way we're able to do this is through a remanufacturing program called GARS, for Global Asset Recovery Services. And this is a network of certified vendors across the globe, which restore spare parts to reliable and functioning parts, and also with full warranty. So they're really recertified parts. And those refurbishment operation so enable us to extend the life cycle of our enterprise system. But also they help our clients save money. It's obviously cheaper than going with new machines. And last but not least, they contribute to the circular economy goals that we've set up for ourselves and also for our customers. So I mentioned GAS is a global network. And so obviously being able to move those parts across borders is a core aspect of the product design and the product management policy that we have. And this is where those policies to facilitate customs and trades are essential. So I'm going back to the trade aspects. And unfortunately, we've seen some countries treating refurbished ICT parts and components as e-waste or used goods that are meant for dumping, and also implementing then restrictions governing the importation of those goods. Some countries actually go as far as prohibiting the import of those goods, or just allow the importation through a sort of heavy license process. So now I'm not saying obviously that government should not restrict the importation of used goods or e-waste. That's not this, but to just treat refurbished parts solely as e-waste, I think failed to recognize the positive results that come from refurbishment and the resource and the reuse, from an environmental perspective. And the ambassador just mentioned refurbishment. This is exactly why there is a need to distinguish those two concepts. And so addressing certain trade challenges around this, and at the center of this, providing a sort of clear definition or a shared definition of what those remanufactured goods are, to facilitate imports of those goods can help reduce costs for manufacturers, but also users, and support circular economy goals, and then obviously reduce the risk of filling landfills and going e-waste. So I'll just stop here for now. I'm happy to go into further details on some of the challenges or solutions, but this is an overview of how we approach this important topic.
Thank you very much. I think from each of our speakers, we got a little element of what an ecosystem for circular economy would look like. And I would like to take this next round of questions to take a deeper dive into some of these issues, especially related to circular trade. So I would ask to Jeet and Ambassador Boza, what is the current universe of policy solutions that we need to have in order to facilitate circular trade? And how is the WTO or is the WTO positioned? And if so, how is it positioned to show leadership on both sustainability and trade on these issues for things like market access, trade facilitation, green channels, et cetera? Where do you see the strengths, and maybe where do you see the weaknesses of the WTO as a leader on those issues?
Thanks for the question, Tiffany, and I'm very happy to get us started and let the ambassador take the more difficult part of the question. Before jumping the gun on solutions, I just wanted to also highlight and frame some of the problems that keep coming up in this segment. We hear a lot about inadequate border capacities, especially in developing countries, in dealing with shipments of circular goods. Then there's, of course, the lack of granularity. And this harkens all the way back to HS codes in correctly identifying goods that you're importing or exporting, how beneficial to the circular economy they are, the easiest example would be recycled versus recyclable versus non-recyclable goods. It is not apparent in many of the material flows, what you're importing and exporting based on physical characteristics. So that is another problem. Then discordant standards and definitions. I think both Becky and Amelie made references to this. Even though a refurbished or a remanufactured goods are very different from used goods or goods destined for landfill, that distinction is not always made very apparent when you're importing or exporting. And then finally, there are various issues around import restrictions, licensing, and sometimes even restrictions on export of waste and scrap. So all of these together create certain roadblocks for a large-scale circular transition. Then there is a discord sometimes between the environment and the trade community. And many times without realizing, a lot of environmental legislation has knock-on effects on trade, and a lot of trade legislation has knock-on effects on environment. So if these two parts of the house do not communicate with each other adequately, then we tend to have policies that are suboptimal. And then I saved the biggest problem for the last, and I think the ambassador also made reference to this. The biggest problem is, of course, illicit trade, illicit waste trade. And this is a very real and legitimate concern for a lot of developing economies, which inhibits trust building in the circular economy. So I think if we are to address circular economy at a scale through trade solutions, through development solutions, we really need to do something about illicit trade. And this gives us a very nice North Star to look at before legislating on trade for circularity. We have to give due importance to environmental outcomes. We cannot legislate trade policy in a vacuum. Environmental outcomes, environmental goals should come first. Given that framing, happy to propose 3 solution areas that we have been working on over the last year with many of you in the room. The first one is very simply market access on circular goods and services. So how do you promote and increase trade in goods and services that are good for the circular economy? First step for this would be to identify what these goods are, identify what is stopping further trade in them. So that would be through your tariff analysis, non-tariff barriers, and then going more granular through HS codes if needed, and doing everything that creates a smooth landing for more trade in these goods and services. The second point is on remanufacturing, repair, and refurbishing. Why we're singling this out? Because compared to recycling or recovery, which go further down the R scale, remanufacturing, refurbishing, and repair have been shown to have better dividends for the environment and for the economy, as both our speakers just alluded to. So it is very important to understand what are the barriers to remanufactured goods and refurbished goods trade. Where are the barriers stemming from? I think most of it is through definitions. A lot of countries, importing countries, have inadequate granularity in definitions of what remanufactured versus used goods are. So that needs to be addressed. And of course, then you need to look at supply chain for spare goods, spare parts. Repair, for example, depends a lot on access to spare parts, which sometimes is constrained in many economies. So that is another area for us to look at. And the final bucket of solution that we can look at is more on the trade facilitation side. And this is not a very easy task to do because a lot of the global environmental architecture that we have right now is very rightfully in place to stop exploitation of developing countries from being destination of waste dumping. But within that framework, how do you find pockets of safe regulatory sandboxes to use trade facilitation and create some green channels to allow for hazardous goods to pass? A very key example here would be smaller countries which do not have the capacity to deal with waste, e-waste, for example, at a scale. How do you then facilitate the movement of that good safely for environmentally sound disposal or recovery or recycling? So that is one template that needs to be thought out. And I think we are in a really good institution for that first step to be taken. There are also other behind the border or domestic measures like EPR or development cooperation, which probably will come to later. But I just wanted to get you started on these 3 areas that we could look at. And there are many vessels to advance them. There are free trade agreements, there are deep trade agreements. There was a really good session yesterday on some of these issues through deep trade agreements. And of course, regional cooperation and fora like the Pacific Alliance or the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, to name a few. Up to you.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, for the question, and thank you yet for your reactions on that. Well, from our point of view, we think that more discussion, more reflection is still needed to better understand the different dimensions of how circular economy and trade intersect, and how trade can leverage to support circular economy at different levels. Circular economy is a complex concept because it captures the whole life of the product. In that line, there are open questions such as, for example, how do we define and classify circular goods? We have challenges to differentiating and verifying between different types of waste materials, secondary materials, second-hand goods, etc. Also, how does the product design is an enabler for circular economy, so the relationship between product design and circular economy, or how standards can support circular economy and trade. There are also other elements such as transparency and traceability of goods that are produced with second materials or recycling materials, the role of the labeling, the environmental goods and services, among others. So we have many things to consider and to discuss. I think there are important dimensions regarding trade facilitation, as well as relating to technical barriers to trade, that can be explored further, seeing what can be learned from the experience of the WTO work in these areas. This has to be done in a balanced way with other aspects to make sure that the transition to circular economy doesn't leave anyone behind, in particular developing countries and micro and small enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you. From their responses focus on more of the policy side of things. Let's get some more practical input from our company representatives. So Becky, Amelie, if I could ask you to each touch on, if you could have your perfect ecosystem for the kinds of work that you're doing in the circular economy, what would that look like? What combination of regulatory practices, available services, and policies do you need to make it possible for you to engage in circular economy and give confidence to the markets that you're engaging in?
I mean, I'm happy to jump first very quickly. I mean, I don't know if we can think about a perfect state. I mean, there's obviously a short term and a more longer term. I mean, I think what Jill alluded to, I think for us, the immediate thing that we think will help would really be addressing this policy gap that we have, which is not having a shared definition of what those remanufactured refurbished parts are. Or that would be really something that would provide the necessary guidance for countries to be able to import this and use this in the right way. Because it's not really about, you know, which countries are bad or good. I think it's just because it's not existing there. So it opens the door to different interpretation and different restrictions. I mean, we obviously have that policy gap. There's also other challenges that are a bit more administrative. If you have countries who uses, for example, different codes or importation or goes under license, some of those processes can be very long and lengthy, and there may be also a way here to shorten those time frame or facilitate those processes. But from a short-term perspective, already a global standards around this definition will be very useful. It will also, I think, in the long term, help capacity building in remanufacturing, because that will probably drive an ecosystem of skill and companies who develop, you know, sort of expertise into doing this. And from a developing country perspective, and I think there's many benefits. Being able to reuse those refurbished parts, I think, help having access to cost-effective technology while reducing the e-waste volumes. And that also support the digitization of their industry more broadly, or their government services. And that makes also them part of a global remanufacturing supply chain. So I think there are different elements that can be very tangible. Obviously, the environmental aspects as well are critical. And I know, G, you mentioned earlier the fact that circular economy is going to, it's not just an end goal, it's actually achieving higher goals. I mean, from IBM's perspective, I think the way that we can accelerate digitalization with this is definitely one of the goals that we can pursue, because this has broader implication also from an environmental perspective. So yeah, I'm just want to stop here and probably.
Let me just clarify. I didn't mean to say that some countries are good or bad. I was looking for benchmarks or best practices in ways that countries who have already wrestled with these challenges or have put together a regime that's functioning well.
All right. So I guess from a Caterpillar perspective, you know, where we would see it be the free movement of, you know, what we call the core. As I was mentioning earlier, you know, we have all customers globally around the world, and getting those back to those processing centers and having that successful remanufacturing process really requires that core to come back. We can't remanufacture product if we're not getting that coming through to those facilities. So I would say that that is why having regulations that support that free flow of core is essential to this business model. So in many countries, there already is that. So there already is the ability to be able to bring remanufactured product in because they view it like new. They're viewing it to have that same quality and performance as the new product. And they're also being able to see those benefits of the same as new warranty. So so from that aspect, those countries are able to help their customers benefit from both the lower cost that this product can provide, as well as helping both that economy and those customers provide that sustainability message to their countries. Now, with other countries, there's still those heavy restrictions there. And so they're having more of that limit around those two pieces that I talked about. And with those restrictions, those customers aren't able to benefit from that remanufactured product. So if countries want to increase their support in the remanufacturing space, they can either choose to lift those restrictions or they can make policy adjustments around the remanufacturing and having some of that nomenclature around what remanufacturing is and how it is not used product, but it's like new product. So some examples, so Mexico actually has an interesting model where they actually bring the cores back and they put it into a bonded location. And this helps them be able to verify that this product is going through a remanufacturing process, is going through that manufacturing piece and is not just coming into the country to be used as a dumping ground or bringing those used products in. And then it also has one HTS in that regard. So it's just an easier way to process those remanufactured products and creates less confusion there. There's also the US, Mexico, Canada Free Trade Agreement that has nomenclature in it around remanufacturing being considered like new. And there's also the APEC Pathfinder Initiative, which has 13 different economies on that Pathfinder Initiative. And again, that initiative also has nomenclature in there around a positive form of remanufacturing being considered like new. So.
To respond to any of those concepts, anything you want to add?
Sorry. Yes, I that what we are mentioning, of course, encourages us very much in our facilitation of the group at TESI on circular economy, because it is very clear that we need an honest conversation about these concepts. They are cross-cutting. They involve different committees and different discussions that we have here. And I am very happy that we also participate in other forums as Chile, in which you mentioned APEC, in which this conversation is relevant, because I think we need also to take into consideration the differences in developing levels and how we can take into consideration our national realities and our national framework, but being part of the solution. And for being part of the solution, we need to look at the problem in the most accurate way from the territory. So I'm very happy that from developing countries as Chile, but you also mentioned Mexico, we're more and more involved in this conversation. So very, very good news for the future.
No, absolutely. Just for ones that don't know, I think this is Becky and my third panel on circularity together this year. So I think I have a little bit of a headache from nodding every time she says something because I cannot agree more. And I think the Mexico example is really good because it also shows how you can use one aspect of trade facilitation, like I was mentioning, towards achieving more remanufacturing. And I think that also establishes the trust that developing countries often want to understand what the end goal of what you're importing as a core is going to be. So I really hope to see that kind of flourish more.
So we've moved from initially talking about concepts of circularity to talking about some of the policies and the sort of what the practical challenges associated with really scaling up on circular trade. I'd like to touch a little bit on where we should be going. But both at the WTO, within companies, and as much as we are focusing now on supply chains, and a supply chain is the whole life cycle of a product, and there are issues with resiliency and sustainability that we're trying to encourage. I think the moment is right to really drive forward circular economy issues and really wrestle with some of these complicated issues. And so looking ahead, what do you think the work ought to be, and how ought the business community and governments be working together to make progress on those issues?
Well, I will kick off, and I will be very, very brief, so we can have time also for questions from the audience. But at least from the point of view of the informal working group on circular economy, which, as I mentioned, we facilitate along with Japan, we have been working to explore the issues of circular economy with a sectoral focus, as well as considering particular policy elements that have been coming up during the exchanges, such as trade facilitation, I've talked about that, waste management concerns, transparency, regulations, among others. So those are the kind of topics that are interesting or are the most interesting for the members of the group. So continuing these exchanges could help to better understand the diverse linkages between circular economy and international trade, and the different challenges and opportunities that we have in that sense. So what I can promise and commit is that we are going to continue participating very actively in those conversations here at the WTO.
All right, I'll go next. A couple different aspects. I think the first one is education. To make policies around the circular economy and remanufacturing, you must first understand how the process works, and that's really getting educated. And that's the reason why you all are here today with us. So, and part of this too is to really fully understand it is going and visiting a facility, seeing the process and how it's done. Now, if you can't make it to one of those facilities and see those manufacturing processes in place, then again, I would suggest reaching out to several of these different initiatives like the APEC Pathfinders that I mentioned, as well as some of these free trade agreements that already have the language around remanufacturing and the circular economy in them, and better understanding how they are inputting that into those free trade agreements, and considering these things like new. The second piece that I would like to touch on is really the digital piece and the tracking and tracing. So for example, at Caterpillar, we have a core management system where when we sell our products out to our dealers and customers, we track that remanufactured good in that core per se. So we're able to see how long that core has been out there, and then we when they send it back to us, we're able to track that was brought back to be able to do the whole crediting process. So, but with this track and tracing abilities, you're able to then see that product and the supply chain flow of it going in and out, and able to see then which ones are not, and have that ability then to contact those folks to see if that core will be coming back or not. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to allude to the development aspect of the circular transition. Just circular transition, just being the operative here. The net zero transition on one side, as we can see, has fallen significantly short of the inclusive part. And as we're at the outset still of solving for circularity, we should incorporate inclusivity by design. There's already a mechanism established for the trade nerds here, Aid for Trade, which is not being sufficiently tapped into. And I think there is a lot of potential in using Aid for Trade or bilateral or multilateral aid towards developing some of these capacities. And I'm happy to give a few examples here where this kind of aid can help developing countries. The first one is clearly in trying to identify what goods and services are beneficial for circular transition in a developing country. And on the flip side of it, also help them identify if they have any export competitiveness in new sectors, thanks to the circular economy. Like Amelie mentioned, getting refurbished goods or increasing reuse rates, repair rates is actually good economically speaking for a developing country, because it also helps them then export some of those and create better market access. The second one is on identifying what kind of tariff and non-tariff barriers are stopping circularity from happening in developing countries. That is quite important. There's intelligence on the market. Similarly, Aid for Trade can support capacity building in developing countries and understanding remanufacturing, repair, and refurbishing. Again, to both Becky and Amelie's points, capacity building for remanufacturing. For trade facilitation, I think the biggest advantage from development cooperation could come from training border workers, customs agencies, to better understand the make of goods, even though it is currently very physically constrained. But I think there is a lot of scope in those capacities being enhanced in developing countries. And more horizontally speaking, Aid for Trade can help develop capacities in trade data collection. This is the first step, building the foundation of understanding your trade flows, how linear versus how circular they are, where your comparative advantages lie, and then monitoring and analyzing with the needed granularity. So I think these are 5 areas where Aid for Trade can really open a lot of doors for inclusive circular transition. But more than anything else, I think, to repeat myself, to solve for circularity, we really need to solve for trust in developing countries. We really need to build that trust that developing countries need to have in the global systems to actively participate in circular value chains.
Well, I will agree with everything that has been said. So it's a bit difficult to finish and to add something that's a bit more original, but no, I mean, I would totally agree with the need to continue the dialogue, and I mean, obviously the WTO is a perfect platform for this. And in this dialogue, I think it's important to keep the industry involved. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time. The industry has developed, you know, an important expertise in that area. So please use us. It's really a call for support. And it's important that we get it right, because I mean, the demand for, I mean, especially in our sector, the demand for technology is unprecedented. It's obviously going to continue. So that means we'll get an increasing volume of equipment, of components that will be available globally, and a lot of those can be reused and refurbished, etc. Plus adding obviously the technologies to help track and trace, which are also important to put in place policies such as digital passports or things like that. So yeah, so basically the industry is here to help, and we're happy to continue the dialogue to make this a goal.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, panel. Let's see if there's, we can get some conversation going with, participants in the audience. If there's any questions or comments or reaction to, what we've talked about. Yes, go ahead. Hi.
Hi, so my name is Silvia Srskun. I'm with the OECD. And first of all, I just wanted to thank all the panelists because the interesting discussion, I think, makes it very easy for us to be here on a Friday afternoon. So thank you very much for that. I had two questions, if I may. And the first one is sparked a bit by Ambassador Boza's introduction, and then I think reflected in also in the interventions of the private sector representatives. And it's about this interaction between goods and services. And I just had a question. Are we thinking enough about that interaction when we are thinking about trade policy? And maybe just examples that come to mind is like when we may need engineering services, but we also may need temporary admissions of goods and things of this sort. So are we thinking enough about that in circular economy? And second question touches upon the digitalization aspects. I'm just wondering, where would you see that digitalization would be most useful? And we were hearing from Becky, of course, from some of the tools that you have to track and trace, but are those sufficiently connected maybe with what we would need at customs level or other agencies level? And given also all the challenges that you all were mentioning at a more analog level, right? The HS codes and certifications and all that sort of thing. So where would that be most useful in your view? So thank you very much.
Who wants to start with that?
No, about the first part of your question, absolutely agree. I think we need a more systemic view about this, because the circular transition entails more than specific projects in goods or services or for a specific sector. This is much more than that. That's why in Chile we are thinking about this circular Chile, because we need a strategy that can involve different sectors, different stakeholders. It's governance. Finally, it's governance. It's how we govern our economy and our value chains. So I absolutely agree that we need an inclusive and systemic approach.
Yeah, that was an excellent question, actually, that you posed. I mean, especially the interaction between goods and services. I mean, obviously, from our perspective, and the goods that I mentioned, which are the mainframe servers, they are made to be delivering services at the end of the day. They're not goods to be used as such. So that interaction is obviously clear for us. And that also means that the role of digital trade and data is an important aspect as well of the circular economy. And there were a lot of panels also this week around digital trade, the importance of having facilitating digital trade rules. You know, there was a lot of discussion around the e-commerce moratorium, etc. I mean, all those agreements at the WTO level are essential for this particular sector. And I think, as you say, it's key to get those two concepts not being distinguished, but joined together. So thank you for that.
To your first question around the goods and services, so we're very much thinking about them hand in hand. So from a Caterpillar perspective, you know, we're creating that remanufactured product that can then be at the dealerships on the shelf, ready to go for when a customer's machine breaks down. Those dealerships are actually providing the service where they're doing rebuilds using remanufactured product in their rebuild processes. And essentially, it's a great way to, again, kind of reduce the cost from a labor standpoint for the dealerships, but it also then provides that uptime for the customers very quickly. So, because they already have that completed product that they can put right into their rebuilds themselves. To your second question on the data side with the track and trace. So one of the things so that we cannot do is when that core comes back and goes into new products, like I said, during the disassembly process, it completely gets disassembled and it loses its identity at that point in time. So we're not continuing to track that through, but rather when that product is completed and having it go out to the market and then come back, that's around our track and trace. But then also, we're like I mentioned, the Mexico example where they just have one HT code or one HS code that really allows for that remanufactured product. We also have with our remanufactured product, it's very distinguishable, meaning that it's the only nomenclature for within Caterpillar for those defined products. So it's all encompassed around our certain naming convention there. And so when it goes through customs, they know that it's a CAT remanufacturing product, and no other product at CAT then has that same distinguishing characteristic on it. So those are a couple things that we do just to make it easy when it goes through the customs and exporting and everything. So.
Back here.
Yes, thanks very much, Jack Barry from Chatham House. Thank you to all the panel. It's really great to see this conversation. So I've got two questions, I guess. One is just one's more of a statement, which is the HS were mentioned and classifications as being one of the primary challenges. So we're just publishing a paper on Monday with the World Customs Organization and UNECE, which deep dives into this topic. So I welcome you to go and interrogate that and give feedback. On the second point, Amelie, you mentioned the Global Asset Recovery Services, which I've been working on this for years now. Hadn't heard of that. Sounds super interesting. We'd love to learn more about how that actually functions, how you actually helps you get core and things to refurbish across borders. But it seems to me in a wider topic, it's kind of spurred me to think, well, we kind of need a hub somewhere to collect all these best practices and examples, because there's loads from all over. Becky, you mentioned Mexico. There's loads of things in different trade agreements. There's private companies doing their own things. There's traded programs. There's recovery lanes. There's all sorts of really great stuff happening. It's just not brought into one place for everyone to learn about it. So maybe that's like a pitch to the panel. What do you think about something like that?
Well, thank you for the question. So yeah, so this network, I think originates from the 90s. And I think it's a network of about 30 plus remanufacturing site. I think this was actually started as a sort of customer take back remanufacturing website. And I think this really moved into a broader refurbishment where they really just take the spare parts, and so really sort of go into a proper recertification process, and therefore being able to reuse them or have the same, I would say, current specification that a new part would have. And this, so it's not just used for IBM purposes. It's also largely used to the benefits of our customers and other companies. I mean, I'll be happy to put you in touch with people who are in that particular network, but it's an important part of our product management policy internally.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jack, for the question. And also that gives me a really good segue to really acknowledge both Jack and Christoph for really informing a lot of our work. And of course, Becky, a lot of our work on circular trade solutions. On your second question, absolutely, that has been in gestation. We are thinking of doing some sort of a one-stop shop for use cases that can then inform more negotiations around circularity. But I would also let probably the ambassador, that is also part of TESD's group on circular economy. I think they also have plans to do something similar together with us.
Yes, for sure. And going also to your second question, yes, we can see value absolutely on that, because as I have mentioned before, one of the things that TESI, the informal group on circular economy in TESI is doing is this exchange of experiences. So we want to work on put together those experiences. But when you were making this question, I remember an experience that we had in Chile. A couple of years ago, the Ministry of Agriculture published an inventory of practices in the agricultural sector on circular economy, and it was extremely useful because farmers and companies, ag companies, they could see that some practices weren't so difficult. So, and they were very well classified by subsector, by in which part of the process we were talking about. So it was extremely useful because of that, because if we think about circular economy as a concept, as I said before, we can think about governance, transforming our economy, but from the point of view of companies, and especially micro and small companies that we have very much in the agricultural sector, they need concrete proposals. So through that inventory, they could see that, and they could see that that was feasible and something that they could replicate. So I absolutely agree with you that that's extremely useful.
In the back.
Hi, am I audible? Okay, great. Thank you. I was actually following your live webcast, and
Could you speak up? Sorry, we can't hear.
yeah. Is it better now? Okay. Well, thank you so much. I was actually following your live webcast on my way here, and I wanted to actually ask the panel a question about the role of local markets and livelihoods in the circular economy framework, because I come from a country where I've seen examples of farmers having zero dependence on markets in today's day and age, where they invest in practices like seed banks and take seeds when they need for the crop harvest, and after the harvest they give it back. In terms of trade as well, we know that circular economy frameworks do not go where they are needed most. So what would you have to say on scaling principles from these local markets and livelihoods which have successfully developed circular economy frameworks today and which are very green, sustainable? Yeah.
Well, I will give this opinion as an economist and not as the ambassador of Chile, but in my previous life, when I was a full-time professor of agricultural economics, in fact, when I thought about circular economy, I thought about those experiences that you're mentioning. However, I find extremely interesting or I found extremely interesting when I came here that there is this group, not only WTO delegates, but also WEF, also Gratitude Institute, also other stakeholders that are supporting the research and supporting the thinking about how we can relate circular economy and international trade, because that hasn't been so obvious. So I think that we need to reinforce that discussion. Trade needs to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So, and I absolutely agree with you that maybe we can also learn from the local practices. But I'm very happy that we are addressing this issue from a multi-level perspective and not only identifying circular economy in a determined scope or territory. So, oh, someone is requested. But of course, I think we can learn how we can escalate those practices. But it's important that we maintain this multi-level point of view.
I can go next. and I'm not answering as an economist. Um, really good question. It's a thinker, so bear with me as I think I'm developing an answer as I'm speaking to you. So one of the projects that we are doing right now is on getting sustainable FDI, sustainable investment in developing countries. And bang on to your point, there is a need for the domestic sectors, like the ambassador mentioned, MSMEs, SMEs, to really benefit from that sustainable investment and be part of global value chains where it suits them. And for that, signaling is very important. Like you mentioned, a lot of these sustainable practices go unsung because they are not able to adequately market it when they need to join global value chains. So one of the projects that we're doing is, together with investment authorities in the countries and skills development missions, trying to first create that signal. In Cambodia and Namibia, for example, we are creating sustainable supplier databases. So I think, and the government is really in a good position to do this kind of an audit than anyone else. So they create a database of suppliers who have sustainability characteristics like the ones you mentioned. And then investors with a sustainable bent of mind that come to the country to invest can then draw from that bank of sustainable suppliers. And now with regulation, for example, from the EU, which requires investors to prove supply chain due diligence, I think that kind of regulation really acts as a positive force behind it and really rewards, because so far in many cases, your reward for being sustainable was not very apparent. Because there are a lot of perverse subsidies that undercut sustainability efforts. So with these kind of signaling, and I'm acknowledging that a lot more needs to be done, but to us, we thought this was a good first step for that signal to be developed and then conveyed to the market. So I think, yeah, that would be my answer to your question.
We are almost at the end of our time, but I'll make one more opportunity if anyone's, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Tiffany. Yuri Uno with Toyota. As we auto industry shift towards electrification of the vehicles, as you can imagine, recycling a battery is a big challenge for us. And it's really interesting to hear how you guys are successfully doing remanufacturing and collecting all the parts that you need to remanufacture, I guess. Do you have any suggestions or recommendations on, because that could be a challenge to get our batteries back so we can recycle and also get more batteries from other components from other industries. So we all have enough critical minerals, which we don't have right now. Thank you.
Whoops, sorry. I would say probably my first suggestion would be ensuring that you're working with the new side engineers that they are designing for remanufacturing or recycling, whatever or if you're, repurposing batteries, you want to make sure that they're really considering multiple life uses out of that. That's probably one of the biggest keys. And then also, I think it is critical from a standpoint of when you are trying to, I guess, get engagement from your customers is, providing that supply chain ease of getting that material back, and maybe having a system to be able to track that kind of thing. So we are also, as Caterpillar, we're looking at the electrification space as well, and in the battery space. So I would say probably even to, talking with industry partners or just various partners and experts who are also working through this as well, and where they're seeing some best practices too.
Yeah, I would actually echo the same as well. I mean, for us, the number one criteria, I would say, would really need to start about product design. You need to start thinking about how the products are made in a way that you will be able to then recycle, refurbish, as opposed to just deal with a problem when you haven't thought about how this would be done in the first place. So product design is really how we approach that issue in the first place. I mean, the supply chain as well, very important. I mean, being able to rely on a network of of trusted supplier, certified supplier with the necessary skills to be able to take on those operations is important. And then the last one is transparency, using data and technology to be able to track, trace, make sure that you have the right information about what's in the product, where that particular material goes, etc., how it is reused and so on. So that I would totally agree with what Becky just said.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us and sticking with us through the end of the hour. And want to especially thank my colleagues on the panel. I appreciate your willingness to work with us on this discussion. Obviously, while we've made a lot of progress already, there is still a lot of work to be done. But I think the WTO, if nothing else, is fundamentally a forum where countries can come together and discuss complex issues with one another and look for solutions. And the time is really right for us to focus on the contribution circular economy can make to green supply chains and delivering sustainable trade. So I know this conversation will continue and the work will continue, but I want to thank you for your time here tonight and wish everyone safe travels going home after the forum. Thank you.